So, what's this Chinese 12-point peace plan we're hearing about as Xi Jinping is in Moscow talking with Vladimir Putin? Well, they have a 12-point plan, and I'm going to look at these points, but the big thing in this plan is that most of these points are kind of generic, right? And not a big deal. China is inserted two big ones in here. One, pushing back against the very concept of NATO and of security alliances that it's attributing to a Cold War mentality, and the use of economic pressure through sanctioning unless it's authorized by the UN Security Council, which, by the way, China and Russia have a veto on. So, yeah. So, in a lot of ways, it's embedded in it. These points, these 12 points, have kind of the Chinese wish list for the New World Order. So just to quickly look at these things, right? Respecting the sovereignty of all countries, that's a good starting point. By that logic, we would be against the Russian invasion. Of course, they're going to make it a two-way thing. But abandoning the Cold War mentality is a big part of it, right? And they argue that the expansion of NATO, the desire to expand NATO to Ukraine and Georgia, as stated by NATO, was the unresolved concern of Russia. And so that's their SOP, or that's their siding with the Russian security interests. Now, as we go through ceasing hostilities, having a ceasefire, resuming peace talks, resolving the humanitarian crisis, if we just, keeping nuclear power plants safe, who wouldn't be against that? Reducing strategic risks, don't use nukes. Hey, I'm on board with that. But then we get down to stopping unilateral sanctions and keeping industrial and supply chains stable. Now, that is, again, I think a very Chinese desire, or, that this idea, as I mentioned earlier, that any sanction not authorized by the Security Council is unilateral in their point of view. Never mind that these are very multilateral sanctions. They're taking the point of view that only the Security Council can issue these things. And again, that's convenient because Russia and China can veto anything on the Security Council. But the broader measure here is, I think, this sovereignty issue that China has. I always think of China as a sovereignty monger. They really don't want any interference in internal politics, and sanctions are the number one way that the Western world goes at nations to try to tell them to, have human rights abuses, to not have them, that is, to address them, to, whatever agenda item is on the West's mind, sanctions are the go-to. And so China's kind of pushing back on that. Also, the idea of keeping the industrial and supply chain stable, not using economics as a weapon, right? These are these are Chinese wish lists. They would like a world in which those were stable. And this represents, I think, a pitch to the rest of the world, to a lot of other nations around the world that might be very sympathetic to this point of view. So that's what I see as the key. I don't know if they're poison pills, but they're definitely this is the agenda hidden in the 12 points.